Welcome to an episode of the Let's Get Vulnerable podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us, Dick Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems. And we're so excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Morgan. Really excited to be with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. I want to give the audience just a little bit of information about you. If you're not familiar with Internal Family Systems, it's an incredible framework. So I encourage you to also research it, look into it yourself. But a little bit about Dr. Schwartz. He began his career as a systemic family therapist and an academic. Grounded in systems and thinking, Dr. Schwartz developed internal family systems in response to clients' descriptions of various parts within themselves. He focused on the relationships among these parts and noticed that there were systemic patterns to the way they were organized across clients. He also found that when clients' parts felt safe and were allowed to relax, the clients would experience spontaneously the qualities of confidence, openness, and compassion that Dr. Schwartz came to call the self. He found that when in the state of self, clients would know how to heal their parts. So such a revolutionary framework. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Tell us a little bit about, I know it says here a bit, but how did you come to doing this work and coming up with this framework?
Yeah, so as you said in the intro, I was a pretty ardent, kind of obnoxious family therapist. There were a lot of us back then because we thought we'd found the Holy Grail and that people who were mucking around in the intrapsychic world were wasting their time because we could change all that by just reorganizing these families' structures. And I decided to prove that by doing an outcomes study in the early 80s and with a population of bulimic kids, and found that it wasn't true, that we could reorganize the families just the way the book said to. And still a bunch of my clients kept binging and purging. And out of frustration, I began asking why, and they started to talk this language of parts, which was pretty foreign to me at the time. Because like most people, I thought, we have one mind that has different thoughts and emotions, but they were talking about these parts as if they had a full range personalities inside. And at first I got scared. I thought maybe they were sicker than I thought. Maybe they had MPD,
DID.
multiple personality, DID, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started listening inside myself and, oh my God, I've got them too. And some of mine are as extreme about food as theirs. And so then I calmed down and just got really curious. And I was fortunate. I had a couple clients who were really articulate about the whole thing. And as you said in the intro, I was not only interested in each part, but I also was interested in all their relationships and the patterns within clients. And so I began mapping them out with the help of my client. And I think I had an advantage over other people in that I really had no presumptions about what I was learning, because I had so assiduously avoided learning about psychoanalysis or any of the other frameworks at the time. So I really had to listen carefully to what my clients were saying and believe them. And that was like a big advantage, because I learned that, number one, it's normal to have these parts, that it doesn't mean you're crazy, that we're born with them, and they're all valuable. There aren't any bad ones, which was the title of my last book, No Bad Parts, which was shocking to me, actually, because I initially made the mistake most people make, which is to assume the critic is this bundle of parental introject nastiness, and the binge is this, out of control impulse. And when you think of them that way, then you're going to fight with them or you're going to try to control them. And that wasn't working. That was making them worse. So out of almost out of frustration, I gave up that approach and just asked what they want, and they started teaching me that they're not what they seemed, and that they're these really good, valuable parts that were forced into these roles that they're in by what happened to you in your history, especially in your childhood, and that that was the big turning point in the history of the model. Was when I finally, out of frustration, got tired of fighting with them and just got curious. And so that's what I learned, that we're born with them. They're all valuable. Trauma and attachment injuries, which I know is one of your big expertises, force them out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be destructive, but maybe were needed back during the trauma. And they get frozen in that time. So they think you're still 5 years old, and they still think they need to protect you that way. And they also now carry what I call burdens, which are these extreme beliefs and emotions that came into you during the trauma and attach to these parts almost like a virus, and then drive the way the part operates thereafter. And so that all blew my mind. I had no clue about any of it. And, you know, I started to try to get my clients to actually listen to the parts rather than fight with them. And that was challenging, because maybe I'm having you, Morgan, work with your critic, which most all of us have one. And I'm trying to get you to listen to it, and suddenly you're furious with it. And it reminded me of family sessions where I'm trying to have two family members talk to each other, and a third one jumps in and screws everything up. And as family therapists, we learn to ask that third one to give us some space and relax back in the room. And so I would say to you, Morgan, could you find the one that hates the critic, and could you ask it to just relax in there for a few minutes? And now how do you feel toward the critic? And it would be an entirely different answer. Whereas seconds earlier, you hated it or were terrified of it. As we get that to open space, suddenly you're curious about it. You're calm relative to it. You have confidence with it, and you even have compassion for it out of the blue. And when you're in that state, the conversation with the critic would go well, because it would relax and it would share its secret history of how it got forced into this role of trying to get you to behave, or trying to get you to not take risks by tearing you down, or whatever its positive intention was. And you would increasingly, as you listen to it, appreciate it for trying at least to keep you safe. And as it felt appreciated, it would soften even more and could reveal what it was protecting inside. And then we would negotiate permission to go to that and heal that. So, so the big deal about IFS isn't just this idea that we have parts and they're all valuable, and they're forced out of their roles, but that there is this other person inside of us who, once the parts open space, comes out spontaneously, can't be damaged, is just beneath the surface of these parts, and knows how to heal inside and outside. And as I was working with clients, and I might say, Morgan, what part of you is that? They'd say, that's not these parts. That's not a part like these others. That's me. That's myself. So I came to call that the self with a capital S. And it turns out that that is in everybody, and that is covered over by these parts. But once they uncover it, that's the big deal about IFS, that's in there, and it can be accessed that quickly.
There's so much of what you're saying that overlaps with my approach when I work with clients. And I think, of course, there's different terms.
Mm.
The self I would refer to as your highest and best self, right? And it's so wonderful to realize that that is there within all of us, right? And it's simply doing the work to allow the self to come out. I know you mentioned the critic. Do you have a list that you could share with us? Because I know the audience is going, oh my gosh, what parts do I have? So do you have a list of some of the common parts for all of us?
Yeah. Again, this list will be of the common roles the parts have been forced into, not who the parts are without the role. But, again, I'm a systems guy. So as I'm hearing about all this, I'm looking for patterns and distinctions. And the biggest distinction that's held up all these years, 40 years, this is the 40-year anniversary of discovering this. Thank
That's
you.
Amazing.
The biggest distinction is between parts that before they were hurt, you would think of them as these inner children who are so delightful and playful and loving and open and creative. But once they do get hurt, or once you get hurt, they're the ones that get hurt the most because they're also the most sensitive parts of us. And so they then carry the burdens of worthlessness or terror or emotional pain, things like that. And once that happens, they have the power to overwhelm us with their feelings. And so we don't want to be around them. So, and everybody around us tells us to just move on. Don't think about those memories anymore. Just let it go. So we tend to lock away those parts, what we call those exiled parts, just because they got hurt, and try to live our life such that they never get triggered again. Because if they do get triggered, it's like flames of emotion going to consume you. So, and then once you have a bunch of exiles, you feel more delicate. The world feels more dangerous because so many things could trigger them. So a lot of other parts are recruited to become protectors. And some of them protect you in an ongoing way. They kind of are what we call the ego. They're running your life. And so some of them maybe are monitoring your relationships and making sure no one gets close enough to hurt you again, or no one gets too distant so you don't feel abandoned. And others try to make you look perfect so that no one rejects you, and they can be very critical. So that's one class of critic. Others are pushing you hard to achieve a lot to counter the worthlessness. So, and they also can be very critical. So there's a whole lot of different, what we call manager parts that become critics a lot of the time. Some of them are criticizing you, like I said earlier, to run down your confidence so you stay small and you don't take any risks. But they're all just trying their best to keep you safe. And then others, and this is particularly true for socialization of women, try to take care of everybody and don't let you take care of yourself. So I could go on and on about typical, what we call manager parts.
Yeah.
Some of them keep you a little dissociated from your body so you don't feel too much, or keep you in your head so you only think, you don't feel, and so on. But what they have in common is this desire to keep the exiles contained by controlling both your body and the outside world. So managers are big into control. They like pleasing people. When all that doesn't work and an exile does get triggered, it's a big emergency. It does feel like you might die. It feels the emotion is so scary. So there's another set of protectors who immediately go into action to deal with this emergency in an also often a very impulsive way. And the goal now is just to get you out, get you higher than the flames of emotion, or douse them with some substance, or distract you until they burn themselves out. And so we call these firefighter protectors. And like I said, in contrast to the managers who are trying to keep everything under control and please everybody, firefighters often take you out of control and piss off everybody around you. But they think if they don't do this, terrible things are going to happen. And so they don't care about the collateral damage to your body, to your relationships. They just know they got to save your life this way.
Right.
So lots of the addictions and all kinds of rage sometimes, or dissociation, are these firefighters.
Yeah.
So that's the map. It's pretty simple.
Uh-huh.
The main distinction is between exiles and protectors. And then within protectors, there's the managers and the firefighters.
Yeah, definitely fascinating. I think the listeners are all thinking about how this applies to them and what it looks like. And I think one of the places my brain goes, which you already mentioned this, is the attachment wounds and our attachment styles and how that relates to this model. I'm particularly interested in disorganized attachment, right? That we see correlated with childhood trauma. Because I'm imagining that is just a very dysregulated system that has a lot of different approaches going on. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on a disorganized attachment style and kind of how that would relate to this model.
Yeah, I I always have trouble with the regulated idea because it's just a different way of regulating. I mean, these parts are doing their best to quote unquote regulate you when it feels so scary. And so it's not necessarily dysregulated, it's just extreme. And they're using extreme methods to regulate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like to me, it's like a unhelpful or chaotic form of regulating, even though it is regulating. It's not our highest and best self, right? It's
yeah, but again,
it's what we know how to do, right?
Well, it's what our parts learned how to do when you were 5 years old, and because they still are stuck back there, they think they still need to do it.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to bring to psychiatry and psychology is all of these diagnoses are just descriptions of common patterns that parts are stuck in. And so I'm trying, for example, to get the field of addictions to go to the addict part and not try to control it, but try to honor it for its service, like you might the military, and love it up, and then learn what it's protecting, and then get permission to go to that, and then heal the parts that are still living back when you got hurt, and get them out of there and help them unload the feelings and beliefs they carry. And then the addict part doesn't need to do this anymore. It'll do something entirely different that's much more valuable. So it's really a model of liberation of these parts from the roles they got forced into. And that goes for all the personality disorders. We've done this model with all kinds of heavy attachment wounded parts and people. And it's just a very different paradigm for understanding all of that.
Right. It makes me think back to Carl Rogers, like at the very beginning, right? Radical self-acceptance. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. Is there some overlap with Gestalt therapy approaches in what you're talking about?
Yeah, I had heard about Gestalt when I was in grad school before I got into this, and they had the open chair technique, and so you would be talking to your top dog part and so on. But I thought it was all a kind of metaphor, and and I think they did too. But yeah, the idea that there are parts and you can talk to them, Gestalt was into, as well as something called psychosynthesis, and so there were a number of models that were fooling around with multiplicity back in the day, and Jung also with what he called complexes and archetypes.
Right.
So all the same territory, really.
And you've really taken it to another level of defining it and building the frameworks and models for understanding it.
Yeah, and I brought systems thinking to it, which the others really hadn't. And this discovery of self is really, like I said, the big deal about IFS. So that it isn't just, finding and listening to the parts a little bit, but it's releasing this inner leader who, in contrast to Carl Rogers, where you just are accepting, you're accepting them isn't helping them that much. What helps them is getting them out of the roles they're stuck in. And to do that, you have to see what happened in the past. So you become a witness to your own history. And then I might say to you, Morgan, now I'd like you to go to that little girl and be with her in the way she needed somebody at the time. So I'd have you as yourself enter that scene and maybe hold her, that little girl, during the time, and maybe even yell at your parent who was hurting her for her. And then when she was ready, take her out of that time to the present often, at which point she'd be happy to unload the feelings and beliefs, the burden she got back there. At which point she would absolutely transform and become a happy inner child part that loves giving you lots of joy and playfulness.
Yeah. What I love about this approach is similar to what I do with clients, which is this idea that we can't just do like a cognitive behavioral approach because it's simply too surface level. So this idea of you do have to be a witness to your past, as you're talking about, and a witness to the wounding that you've experienced, and that you actually do have to have corrective experiences for that past trauma. I think it's really important in this day and age when people do just want a quick fix, or they just want to be different, or they just want to think different, to acknowledge that we really can't heal unless we are willing to revisit those wounds and sit with them and show up. I would think of it as, can you show up as your highest and best self or your ideal parent in those moments? And how would you show up for you in those moments?
Yeah, it sounds like we're in the same ballpark with that.
Yeah.
Which, is different from a lot of attachment-based therapies where you might do the witnessing, but the therapist would be the good attachment figure, because basic attachment theory says you don't have any of this stuff inside of you unless you got it in a relationship. And so what I found is that's just not true. That I love attachment theory, but that particular assumption is just wrong, because we're born with this self and it knows how to heal. And so the goal becomes for self to become the good attachment figure rather than the therapist or your spouse or someone like that. So that if you can do that for yourself, then your partner can be a secondary attachment figure, but you're the primary one, which is what I wrote about a lot in this book. You're the one you've been waiting for.
Right. Yes. I full-heartedly agree. And, honestly, this was one of the things that sort of led me away from the traditional psychotherapy approach that I was in. And now I'm in the coaching world and have created programs. And part of it was this empowering approach that you're talking about, is that people really can heal themselves. They just need to do work that's deep enough
Mm-hmm.
that allows them to do that. And I do have a huge focus on belief work, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of what you're talking about as well. And um, so yeah, I just love, let's talk about that, how traditional psychotherapy almost takes away some of the, I mean, we love it. And some approaches can maybe take away a client's opportunity to heal themselves and show up as the highest and best self. What would you say about that?
Well, I think that's true. I don't want to minimize the healing that takes place. So you can do a lot of healing in a secure relationship with a therapist who is being this good attachment figure that will help your parts feel a lot better and in some cases unburden. But you will still feel very dependent on that therapist. Your parts will attach to that person,
Mm-hmm.
and rather than to yourself. And when you go out in the world, those parts will attach to an external person first. That'll be their primary attachment figure. And there are relationships that can work out even with that. I mean, with that kind of system. But that, if you see your partner as the one who can make these formerly exiled parts of you feel better, that puts a lot of pressure on your partner to always be nice and loving and
Yes.
caretaking. And when your partner isn't like that, there can be a big internal reaction
Mm-hmm.
from those exiles, and then your protectors get into it. And
Yeah, just to add to this, because it's not then only about the relationship, it's also about your well-being, because your well-being was wrapped up in your partner's approach to you. So
exactly,
that's why it can just be a disproportionate response a lot of times.
that's right. And then your partner's saying, "What the hell? Where is this coming from?" And so, and then your protectors will go into what I call one of four different projects. So either they'll try to get your partner to change and focus a lot of, not always anger, but just manipulative ways to get them to behave again and take care of your exiles. Or they'll try to get you to change, but with the same goal. So your partner is nice to you again. So get you to quit yelling or get you to lose weight or whatever they think is necessary to have your partner back into the role of your redeemer. Or if that doesn't work, start to think, well, this was the wrong partner. That redeemer is still out there somewhere. Start looking around.
Mm. Oh, you're describing my 20s.
And
Yeah.
if you get burned enough times, then you kind of give up on a human being and you start thinking,
Yeah.
I'll just, get into work in a big way or
You become
something.
hyper independent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I always talk about secure attachment, that it's very important to become securely attached to yourself
Mm-hmm.
first.
Yeah.
So this really aligns with that piece.
Very much. That's the whole goal of IFS is, well, there are four goals. One is the liberation of these parts from the extreme roles they've been forced into to be who they're really designed to be.
Mm-hmm.
The second goal is for those parts to come to trust self as a leader. And the third goal is for the parts to get to know each other better and start to work in harmony and uh, and get along and work together at which point you feel more integrated, even though the parts don't disappear. You just don't notice them as much. And then the fourth goal is to lead your external life more from self with those C word qualities. So when I was doing this, and I would notice it would be almost like the same person would pop out in different clients as I got these parts to open space. I cataloged the qualities that would show up. And
the 8 C's.
The 8 C's, yeah, I mentioned 4 of them already, which are calm, confidence, curiosity, and compassion. But also people would suddenly become very clear in terms of how they were seeing things, or very creative where they were stuck before. Now they have creative solutions for things, or they would feel connected in a way to the other person that they didn't before. Or I always forget one. What's the 8th? Courageous. They would feel, they would have the courage to have conversations they couldn't have before, or to go places in the inner world they couldn't before. So those are what we call the 8 C's of self. And those C words have held up really well over the 40 years I've been doing this as the main qualities that apply to the healing endeavor. There are other qualities of self like joy and playfulness and patience and so on, but those 8 C's have held up well.
I love it. Those are all qualities that we need, and I can definitely relate to that. It's funny. I use the term getting into alignment, which I think also could be replaced with being integrated, but being in alignment with the highest and best self and the self, right? I think it is amazing to see how when you can get there, all the problems that somebody would come to you with, it all can dissipate, because if you are truly leading yourself from that place, you can self-heal, and you know how to move through whatever comes your way, really.
Yeah, and you can also relate to your partner in a way that calms everything down, and you're not a mushball. You're standing up for yourself because you have courage and clarity and confidence, but you're not doing it from a place of judgment. You're doing it with that C word, compassion, also. So you're speaking for your parts to your partner, like, what you said just a second ago hurt this little one inside of me, and I'd prefer that you not say that, but you're saying it from a different place than this protector who comes in and says, how could you have said that to me? Didn't you see how much that would hurt? So it produces a different way of communicating and relating in relationships also.
Yeah, allowing for clear boundaries while also opening space for deep connectedness.
Yeah. And self is contagious. So even if my partner is in a big protector, if I can just stay in self and not match the energy, that will pull for herself. And it's hard because in my marriage, her protectors are pretty powerful. But if I can just stay steady that way, that protector's calming down and separating from her and letting herself emerge. And then we could have a very different kind of conversation.
So powerful. You can model it. Yeah. What would you say to someone who is listening to this and they're going, oh my gosh, I really need to look at this. Where do I start? Is there something that they could do just to even get started after listening to this episode?
Well, there are 3 books that I've done that apply to what I'm talking about. One I've mentioned is called You're the One You've Been Waiting For, and is published by Sounds True. And there's the second version of that just came out. And that's the one that applies to relationships the most. And then I fairly recently did a book called No Bad Parts, also published by Sounds True, um, which includes some of the spirituality of it. And people really like that one too. And these are written for the public. And then there's another book called An Introduction to IFS,
Mm-hmm.
which is written both for therapists and for the public. So that's where I would start. And I'm at a place, I've been at this 40 years, like I said, and mainly been focused on training therapists in this,
Mm-hmm.
and have gotten to the point where it's become really popular and where I want to bring it to the public in a more direct way. So we're talking about not podcasts, apps
Mm,
and other kinds of books. And
that's
so
great.
that's all in the process. Yeah.
That's great. Well, this is kind of a personal question, but 40 years is a long time. And
I'm very old. Yes.
no,
That's what you're asking.
no, no, no. I admire that you have built this career, especially in a space that is notorious for burnout. And I wanted to just ask you, what's your big why and what keeps you showing up and creating new things?
Oh, that's a good question. So the why is, very early on, with the story I was telling you about clients teaching this to me, and then when I ran into what I call self, I really got the big vision of this. I thought, if this pans out, that this is in everybody and can be accessed this quickly, and when accessed really starts to harmonize things, that's a big deal. That could really change everything. And at the time I was a kind of lost 32-year-old kid and thought, boy, I hope the person who can take this where it's supposed to go comes along, because it's not me.
But
But
you're the one you've been waiting for.
turns out I'm the one I was waiting for. And and that vision of possibility has carried me all these years, and
Hmm.
still does, because it was really rough in the beginning. I got attacked by analysts and also by my family therapy colleagues as having sold out. So
Ugh, sometimes people in the field are the worst when you have ideas that are outside the field. I know what that's like.
yeah.
Wow. Well, I love that you at your core know that this has been helpful to people, and that it seems like that's kind of what keeps you going, is knowing that, more and more people need access to this information as well. And writing a book, I wrote my first book last year, and I know that it's no easy feat, especially putting it into a way that's accessible to
Mm-hmm.
people and making it a easy read. So
Yeah.
I love that you've been able to do that multiple
Well,
times.
congratulations on yours. And yeah, it's challenging. I actually love writing. I don't have time for it anymore. It's really a loss for me. But
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of the just focusing and putting it on paper brings a lot of new ideas. I bet you found that too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so I miss it.
Mm, I hope you can get back to it someday soon.
Me too.
Thank you so much for your time. I think the audience is really going to love this interview. And I love that there's so many things that I relate to you on in terms of this approach. Is there one last thing you would want people to know, maybe if they're struggling in their relationships, or they're struggling to be connected, any last words of wisdom you would say to someone?
Um, yeah, with relationships and connection, we didn't get into this too much, but if you can access this place of self, not only do you feel more connected to your parts, but you feel more connected to the divine in a way. Because for me, self is a piece of that. And that can hold you through lots of lonely times, just to know that you aren't alone at that level. And then once you get that, you have an easier time of actually going to the parts that you typically fight with or hate in this open, loving way. And that actually, um, that practice by itself can become a life practice that even if you're still lonely, you know that you're not alone.
Beautiful. Well, we may have to have you back and go into that more in depth in the future, because that's something I've been talking about more too, is the
Spiritual
spirituality
side of
and
it.
yeah, and just how that inner, that relationship to self
Mm-hmm.
is divine, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so and you said you go more into that in your book, No Bad Parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where it is the most. Yeah, and
Amazing.
I think there's some other things on our website, which is ifs-institute.com.
Oh, wonderful. I was just going to ask you how people should connect with you and connect with your work. Is that the
Mm-hmm.
best place, the website?
Yeah, the website. There's a variety of paths off of the website.
Yes, I know you also have an Instagram page.
I don't know anything about it. I have somebody that posts because I'm not on Instagram.
Yes.
So,
Well, it's great.
oh, good.
And obviously the books are wonderful. So if you enjoyed this interview, I would definitely encourage you to go check out the books. I'm sure they're on Amazon and everywhere books are available.
Mm-hmm.
So go check out the books. You're the one you've been waiting for, No Bad Parts, and then Introduction to
Internal
yeah,
family systems.
Internal Family Systems. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. This has been such a great interview.
Thank you, Morgan. Thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah, of course. And to everyone listening, we're wishing you high self-worth and great relationships. Until next time.